And I thought I would talk about this. Thank you, Mel, for bringing this to our attention. Um, the monsters knew multiple sclerosis and all your pretty ribbons of the real AIDS. Nonprofit pre-existing rainbow was Epstein Borreliosis Neurological AIDS, infinite antigen variation, mass murdering war crimes against humanity. So this paper is from 1958 in December. The Spirochete and Multiple Sclerosis, California Medicine. The spirochete and multiple sclerosis. In spite of the concerted efforts of many researchers in the field of multiple sclerosis, the cause of this common neurological disease remains obscure. Among the great variety of agents suspected at one time or another of being the causative factor, a living organism bearing a resemblance to a spirochete has been implicated by a number of workers. In 1921, Speer made a dark field preparation by wiping the surface of a plaque from fresh autopsy material with a sterile loop and saw motile spiral organisms. A few years later, Schroeder reported finding black spiral fibrils stained by the silver method of Levediti in lesions of two patients dying of the disease. He was unable, however, to find any spirochetes in another patient with multiple sclerosis, nor in 10 controls free of the disease, and noted that in the absence of culture and transmission, Koch's postulates were not fulfilled. Steiner maintained his enthusiasm for the spirochete as the cause of multiple sclerosis longer than most investigators, but no convincing demonstration of production of nervous system disease by the organisms said to have been isolated from human lesions was ever presented. After a considerable period in which interest in this field had lagged, Eichelson in 1957 reported striking results in the culture of a spirochete-like organism in anaerobic medium. These organisms grew on cultures of spinal fluid in 78% of 76 cases of patients with multiple sclerosis. They did not grow on cultures of spinal fluid from 28 persons who did not have the disease. The illustration of this organism in that report, a silver-stained specimen, showed rather tightly coiled spirals looking much like the spirochete of syphilis. The organisms, previously described by other workers as observed in fresh preparations, had shown a variety of forms, some spiral, others more like spermatoza or a tennis racket. Eichelson's most interesting report encouraged us to try to repeat the work, following as closely as possible the details of procedure as set down in the communication. Let's see if we can get the complete article. The medium was prepared exactly as described by Eichelson. The same branded materials being used where brands were specified. Difficulty was encountered in filtering the medium through a Salus filter, which became plugged after approximately 30 cc's was passed. Since filtering the medium through filter paper before Salus filtering was attempted did not obviate this difficulty, a Seats filter was substituted for the Salus filter with satisfactory results. Sterility tests of the medium were made in thioglycolate broth and blood plates, aerobically and anaerobically at room temperature at 30 degrees Celsius and 37 degrees Celsius. The human serum was drawn on the day of the preparation of the medium. The rabbit serum for the first 20 specimens had been stored in deep freeze. That use subsequently was obtained on the day of the preparation of the medium. The medium was stored at room temperature. It was not renewed at regular intervals for the inoculation of the first half of the series of spinal fluids. When it was recognized that possibly anaerobic conditions were not maintained over a prolonged period, fresh medium was prepared at least every 3 weeks. Specimens for phase microscope examination were obtained at weekly intervals by inserting a capillary pipette through the baseline paraffin oil layer at the top of the culture tubes to the bottom of the tube and withdrawing 0.3 cc's of culture medium. A drop of this fluid was placed on a slide, and polyestrine latex beads, diameter 0.814 micron, were added for the adjustment of fluid level under the phase microscope. A cover slip was placed on top of this preparation, and examination under oil immersion magnifications times 1280 was carried out. Blanks consisting of saline solution inoculated into the culture medium were similarly prepared and examined. Positive cultures were transferred to fresh culture media by withdrawing 0.5 cc's of culture medium from the bottom of the positive culture tubes with a capillary pipette. Between September 1957 and June 1958, 42 specimens of spinal fluid were collected under sterile conditions from 40 patients, 13 of whom were controls known not to have multiple sclerosis, and 27 patients with a secure diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. From one patient in each group, 2 specimens were taken at about a month apart. The fluid was added to the culture medium within 2 to 3 hours of being drawn, except in one instance in which the fluid was allowed to stand overnight. The bacteriologist was unaware of whether the fluid was from a patient who had multiple sclerosis or from a control until after the study was completed. Of the 42 spinal fluid specimens tested, 6 contained organisms. All of the positive specimens were from patients with well-documented multiple sclerosis. Both specimens from the patient who was twice tested were positive. None of the controls and none of the blanks contained these forms. Various forms of motile microorganisms were observed. In length, they varied from 3 to 10 micra, and in width from 0.7 to 0.9 micra. A few organisms looked like curved rod with 2 flagella, while others were short and plump. No spirals were seen in this fresh material, but the appearance was not unlike that described in the early reports. As described by the Eichelson, they seemed to dive into the fluid, and their progress across the field was quite different from the Brownian movement of the polystyrene beads. The organisms appeared in the medium in from 4 to 24 days, and they were never numerous, 2 to 3 being the average number found in a single preparation. After 3 to 5 weeks, all positive cultures showed non-motile debris similar in shape to the motile forms previously seen. Such debris was never seen in negative cultures, whether from persons with the disease or from controls. The gross appearance of the positive cultures was clear, and they could not be distinguished from the controls on this basis. All the positive cultures could be transferred once to new culture medium, but not further. Thus, it cannot be stated definitely that the manipulation occurred in the subculture, as the organisms in the second culture might have been only those surviving from the original culture. Table 1 shows some features of the cases in which there were positive cultures, 5 in number, with 2 specimens of spinal fluid from the 5th case. It will be noted that in 3 of the patients, the disease was of considerable duration, and these 3 had a first zone reaction to the colloidal gold test. In 2 quite recent cases, the colloidal gold test curves were flatter. In general, it may be stated that there was no consistent difference clinically between those cases in which the cultures were positive and those which they were negative. Yet in all the positive cases, the disease was either quite acute or the spinal fluid findings were of an acute nature. Conclusions. In an appreciable portion of our small series of multiple sclerosis patients, 5 of 27 or 18.5%, some form of what seemed to be a living organism was grown on an anaerobic medium as described by Eichelson. While no such organisms were found in a series of patients without the disease. This is a much smaller percentage than reported by Eichelson, but not out of line with the data and point reported by earlier investigations, as summarized by Steiner. All the patients with positive cultures were either in an acute early phase of the disease or had had a colloidal gold test curve in the first zone. The exact nature of the organisms if such they be, remains unknown, and further study of their culture and staining characteristics, as well as the trial of inoculation into experimental animals to try to reproduce the disease, seems urgently indicated. It is hoped that our incomplete but possibly significant findings will stimulate further work on this almost forgotten aspect of the etiology of multiple sclerosis. Well, there we have it. In case you don't know, I put out a video and it got me a strike, and I was unable to upload any videos on YouTube. So this is kind of a trial run to see, while I also get share some information that Mel has shared with us. 1958, guys. The spirochete and multiple sclerosis. Thanks for listening.